Oh. My name is H.C. Andersen. I have something with flowers. Seeking beauty. Following one's heart must be the biggest task in life, and joy. Well, I would like to tell you a story about a couple that followed each other through thick and thin. For what purpose, one might ask. And then again, have you ever seen an old wooden cupboard? Quite black with age and ornamented with carved foliage and curious figures. Well, just such a cupboard stood in a parlour and had been left to the family as a legacy by the great-grandmother. It was covered from top to bottom with carved roses and tulips. The most curious scrolls were drawn upon it, and out of them peeped little stags' heads with antlers. In the middle of the cupboard door was a carved figure of a man, most ridiculous to look at. He grinned at you, for no one could call it laughing. He had goat's legs, little horns on his head, and a long beard. The children in the room always called him Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. It was certainly a very difficult name to pronounce, and there are very few who ever received such a title. But then it all seemed wonderful, how he came to be carved at all. Yet there he was, always looking at the table under the looking-glass, where stood a very pretty little shepherdess made of china. Her shoes were gilt, and her dress had a red rose for an ornament. She wore a hat and carried a crook that were both gilded and looked very bright and pretty. Close by her side stood a little chimney sweep, as black as coal, and also made of china. He was, however, quite as clean and neat as any other. He only represented a black chimney sweep, and the China workers might just as well have made him a prince, had they felt inclined to do so. He stood holding his ladder quite handily, and his face was as fair and rosy as a girl's. Indeed, that was rather a mistake. It should have had some black marks on it. He and the shepherdess had been placed close together, side by side, and being so placed, they became engaged to each other, for they were very well suited, being both made of the same sort of china and being equally fragile. Close to them stood another figure, 3 times as large as they were, and also made of china. He was an old Chinaman who could nod his head, and he used to pretend that he was the grandfather of the shepherdess, although he could not prove it. He, however, assumed authority over her, and therefore, when Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs asked for the little shepherdess to be his wife, he nodded his head to show that he consented. "You will have a husband," said the old Chinaman to her, "who I really believe is made of mahogany. He will make you a lady of Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. He has the whole cupboard full of silver plate, which he keeps locked up in secret drawers." "I won't go into the dark cupboard," said the little shepherdess. "I have heard that he has 11 china wives there already." "Then you shall be the 12th, said the old Chinaman. "Tonight, as soon as you hear a rattling in the old cupboard, you shall be married as true as I am a Chinaman." And then he nodded his head and fell asleep. Then the little shepherdess cried and looked at her sweetheart, the china chimney sweep. "I must entreat you," said she, "to go out with me into the wide world, for we cannot stay here." "I will do whatever you wish," said the little chimney sweep. "Let us go immediately. I think I shall be able to maintain you with my profession." "If we were but safely down from the table," said she, "I shall not be happy till we are really out in the world." Then he comforted her and showed her how to place her little foot on the carved edge and gilt-leaf ornaments of the table. He brought his little ladder to help her. And so they both contrived to reach the floor. But when they looked at the old cupboard, they saw that it was all in an uproar. The carved stags pushed out their heads, raised their antlers, and twisted their necks. The Major General sprung up in the air and cried out to the old Chinaman, "They're running away! They're running away!" The two were rather frightened at this, so they jumped into the drawer of the window seat. Here were 3 or 4 packs of cards, not quite complete, and a doll's theatre which had been built up very neatly. A comedy was being performed in it, and all the queens of diamonds, clubs and hearts and spades sat in the first row fanning themselves with tulips, and behind them stood all the knaves, showing that they had heads above and below, as playing cards generally have. The play was about 2 lovers who were not allowed to marry, and the shepherdess wept because it was so like her own story. "I cannot bear it," said she. "I must get out of the drawer." But when they reached the floor and cast their eyes on the table, there was the old Chinaman awake and shaking his whole body, till all at once down he came on the floor, plump. "The old Chinaman is coming!" cried the little shepherdess in a fright, and down she fell on one knee. "I have thought of something," said the chimney sweep. "Let us get into the great potpourri jar which stands in the corner. There we can lie on rose leaves and lavender, and throw salt in his eyes if he comes near us." "No, that will never do," said she, "because I know that the Chinaman and the potpourri jar were lovers once, and there always remains behind a feeling of goodwill between those who have been so intimate as that. No, there is nothing left for us but to go out into the wide world." "Have you really courage enough to go out into the wide world with me?" said the chimney sweep. "Have you thought how large it is? And that we can never come back here again?" "Yes, I have," she replied. When the chimney sweep saw that she was quite firm, he said, "My way is through the stove and up the chimney. Have you courage to creep with me through the firebox and the iron pipe? When we get to the chimney, I shall know how to manage very well. We shall soon climb too high for anyone to reach us, and we shall come through a hole in the top out into the wide world." So he led her to the door of the stove. "It looks very dark," said she. Still she went in with him through the stove and through the pipe, where it was dark as pitch. "Now we're in the chimney," said he, "and look, there is a beautiful star shining above it." It was a real star shining down upon them as if it would show them the way. So they clambered and crept on, and a frightfully steep place it was. But the chimney sweep helped her and supported her till they got higher and higher. He showed her the best places on which to set her little china foot, so at last they reached the top of the chimney and sat themselves down, for they were very tired, as may be supposed. The sky with all its stars was over their heads, and below were the roofs of the town. They could see for a very long distance out into the wide world, and the poor little shepherdess leaned her head on the chimney sweep's shoulder and wept till she washed the gilt off her sash. The world was so different to what she expected. "This is too much," she said. "I cannot bear it. The world is too large. Oh, I wish I was safe back on the table again under the looking glass. I shall never be happy till I am safe back again. Now I have followed you out into the wide world, you will take me back if you love me." Then the chimney sweep tried to reason with her, and spoke of the old Chinaman and of the Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's legs. but she sobbed so bitterly and kissed her little chimney sweep till he was obliged to do all she asked, foolish as it was. And so, with a great deal of trouble, they climbed down the chimney and then crept through the pipe and stove, which were certainly not very pleasant places. Then they stood in the dark firebox and listened behind the door to hear what was going on in the room. As it was all quiet, they peeped out. Alas! There lay the old Chinaman on the floor. He had fallen down from the table as he attempted to run after them and was broken into 3 pieces. His back had separated entirely, and his head had rolled into a corner of the room. The Major General stood in his old place and appeared lost in thought. "This is terrible," said the little shepherdess. "My poor old grandfather is broken to pieces, and it is our fault. I shall never live after this," and she wrung her little hands. "He can be riveted," said the chimney sweep. "He can be riveted. Don't be so hasty. If they cement his back and put a good rivet in it, he will be as good as new and be able to say as many disagreeable things to us as ever." "Do you think so?" said she. And then they climbed up to the table and stood in their old places. "As we have done no good," said the chimney sweep, "we might as well have remained here instead of taking so much trouble." "I wish grandfather was riveted," said the shepherdess. "Will it cost much, I wonder?" And she had her wish. The family had the Chinaman's back mended and a strong rivet put through his neck. He looked as good as new, but he could no longer nod his head. "You have become proud since your fall broke you to pieces," said Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billygoat's Legs. "You have no reason to give yourself such airs. Am I to have her or not?" The chimney sweep and the little shepherdess looked piteously at the old Chinaman, for they were afraid he might nod, but he was not able to. Besides, it was so tiresome to be always telling strangers he had a rivet in the back of his neck. And so the little China people remained together and were glad of the grandfather's rivet and continued to love each other till they were broken to pieces. How fortunate for the 2 lovers that the Chinese man now fell silent, otherwise rumors would start flying thick and fast. Please, forgive me. Now I'm the one to talk. Or maybe it's just the scissors that have something on their mind. All things are animated and want to tell stories. Let's listen in. "That was a terrible affair," said a hen. "And in a quarter of the town, too, where it had not taken place. That was a terrible affair in a hen roost. I cannot sleep alone tonight. It's a good thing that many of us sit on the roost together." And then she told a story that made the feathers on the other hens bristle up and the cock's comb fall. There was no doubt about it. But we will begin at the beginning, and that is to be found in a hen roost in another part of the town. The sun was setting and the fowls were flying onto their roost. One hen, with white feathers and short legs, used to lay her eggs according to the regulations and was, as a hen, respectable in every way. As she was flying upon the roost, she plucked herself with her beak, and a little feather came out. "There it goes," she said. "The more I pluck, the more beautiful do I get." She said this merrily, for she was the best of the hens, and moreover, as had been said, very respectable, and she slept. It was dark all around. Hen sat close to hen, but the one who sat nearest to her neighbor did not sleep. She had heard, and yet not heard, as we are often obliged to do in this world in order to live at peace, but she could not keep it from her neighbor on the other side any longer. "Did you hear what was said? I mentioned no names, but there is a hen here who intends to pluck herself in order to look well. If I were a cock, I should despise her." Just over the fowls sat the owl, with Father Owl and the little owls. The family has sharp ears, and they all heard every word that their neighbour had said. They rolled their eyes, and Mother Owl, beating her wings, said, "Don't listen to her." But I suppose you heard what was said. I heard it with my own ears, and one has to hear a great deal before they fall off. There is one among the fowls who has so far forgotten what is becoming to a hen that she plucks out all her feathers and lets the cock see it.
Prenez garde aux enfants, said Father Owl. Children should not hear such things.
But I must tell our neighbour Owl about it. She is such an estimable owl to talk to. And with that she flew away. Too-hoo! Too-hoo! They both hooted into the neighbour's dovecot to the doves inside. Have you heard? Have you heard? Too-hoo! There is a hen who has plucked out all her feathers for the sake of the cock. She'll freeze to death if she's not frozen already. Too-hoo! Where? Where? Cooed the doves. In the neighbour's yard. I've as good as seen it myself. It is almost unbecoming to tell the story, but there is no doubt about it. Believe, believe every word of what we tell you, said the doves, and cooed down into their poultry yard. There is a hen, nay, some say that there are two, who have plucked out all their feathers in order not to look like the others and to attract the attention of the cock. It's a dangerous game, for one can easily catch cold and die from fever, and both of these are dead already. Wake up! Wake up! Crowed the cock, and flew up on his board. Sleep was still in his eyes, but yet he cried out, 3 hens have died of their unfortunate love for a cock. They had plucked out all their feathers. It's a horrible story. I will not keep it to myself, but let it go farther. Let it go farther. Let go farther, shrieked the bats, and the hens clucked, and the cocks crowed. Let it go farther! Let it go farther! In this way, the story travelled from poultry yard to poultry yard, and at last came back to the place from which it had really started. 5 hens, it now ran, have plucked out all their feathers to show which of them had grown leanest for love of the cock. And then they all pecked at each other till the blood ran down and they fell down dead, to the derision and shame of their family and to the great loss of their owner. And the hen, who had lost the loose little feather, naturally did not recognize her own story. And being a respectable hen, she said, I despise those fowls, but there are more of that kind. Such things ought not to be concealed. I'll do my best to get the story into the papers so that it becomes known throughout the land. The hens have richly deserved it, and their family too. And it got into the papers. It was printed, and there is no doubt about it. One little feather may easily grow into 5 hens. Oh, forgive me. I was carried away. But I'm sure the story is mentioned in the newspaper. Other fates are not taken notice of. It was terribly cold and nearly dark on the last evening of the old year, and the snow was falling fast. In the cold and the darkness, a poor little girl with bare head and naked feet roamed through the streets. It's true she had on a pair of slippers when she left home, but they were not of much use. They were very large, so large indeed that they had belonged to her mother, and the poor little creature had lost them in running across the street to avoid 2 carriages that were rolling along at a terrible rate. One of the slippers she could not find, and a boy seized upon the other and ran away with it, saying that he could use it as a cradle when he had children of his own. So the little girl went on with her little naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron she carried a number of matches and had a bundle of them in her hands. No one had bought anything from her the whole day, nor had anyone given her even a penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, poor little child. She looked the picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long fair hair, which hung in curls on her shoulders, but she regarded them not. Lights were shining from every window, and there was a savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she remembered that. In a corner between two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sank down and huddled herself together. She had drawn her little feet under her, but she could not keep off the cold, and she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches and could not take home even a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her. Besides, it was almost as cold at home as here, for they had only the roof to cover them, through which the wind howled, although the largest holes had been stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost frozen with the cold. Ah, perhaps a burning match might be some good if she could draw it from the bundle and strike it against the wall, just to warm her fingers. She drew one out. Scratch! How it sputtered as it burnt. It gave a warm, bright light, like a little candle, as she held her hand over it. It was really a wonderful light. It seemed to the little girl that she was sitting by a large iron stove with polished brass feet and a brass ornament. How the fire burned, and seemed so beautifully warm that the child stretched out her feet as if to warm them. When lo, the flame of the match went out. The stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the half-burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match on the wall. It burst into a flame, and where its light fell upon the wall, it became as transparent as a veil, and she could see into the room. The table was covered with a snowy white tablecloth, on which stood a splendid dinner service, and a steaming roast goose, stuffed with apples and dried plums, and what was still more wonderful, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled across the floor with a knife and fork in its breast to the little girl. Then the match went out, and there remained nothing but the thick, damp, cold wall before her. She lighted another match, and then she found herself sitting under a beautiful Christmas tree. It was larger and more beautifully decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door at the rich merchant's. Thousands of tapers were burning upon the green branches, and colored pictures, like those she had seen in the show windows, looked down upon it all. The little one stretched out her hand towards them, and the match went out. The Christmas lights rose higher and higher till they looked to her like the stars in the sky. Then she saw a star fall, leaving behind it a bright streak of fire. "Someone is dying," thought the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever loved her and was now dead, had told her that when a star falls, a soul was going up to God. She again rubbed the match on the wall, and the light shone around her. In the brightness stood her old grandmother, clear and shining, yet mild and loving in her appearance. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You'll vanish like the warm stove, the roast goose, and the large, glorious Christmas tree." And she made haste to light the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother there. And the matches glowed with a light that was brighter than the noonday. And her grandmother had never appeared so large or so beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and they both flew upwards in brightness and joy far above the earth, where there was neither cold, nor hunger, nor pain, for they were with God. In the dawn of morning, there lay the poor little one, with pale cheeks and smiling mouth, leaning against the wall. She had been frozen to death on the last evening of the year, and the New Year's sun rose and shone upon her little corpse. The child still sat in the stiffness of death, holding the matches in her hand, one bundle of which was burnt. She tried to warm herself, said some. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, nor into what glory she had entered with her grandmother on New Year's Day. Yes, it's all sheer fantasy, of course. Such things do not happen in our time, in our own reality. Do they? Excuse me. I've been given my hot drink of good night milk. I must sleep now. Today has been an eventful day, and tomorrow will bring new adventures. Or who knows, tonight maybe. Sleep often enriches us with the most fabulous tales. Yes. When evening turns to night, dreams poach on our preserves. We would so much like to dream about summer, sun, and happiness, and yet nasty memories make their presence felt. Although we try to cling to images that are bright. It was lovely summer weather in the country, and the golden corn, the green oats, and the haystacks piled up in the meadows looked beautiful. The stork, walking about on his long red legs, chattered in the Egyptian language, which he had learned from his mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the midst of which were deep pools. It was indeed delightful to walk about in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse close by a deep river, and from the house down to the waterside grew great burdock leaves, so high that under the tallest of them a little child could stand upright. The spot was as wild as the center of a thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck on her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task, for the little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the river than to climb the slippery banks and sit under a burdock leaf to have a gossip with her. At length, one shell cracked, and then another, and from each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Peep, peep." "Quack, quack," said the mother. And then they all quacked as well as they could, and looked about them on every side at the large green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look as much as they liked, because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is," said the young ducks, when they found how much more room they now had than while they were inside the eggshell. "Do you imagine this is the whole world?" asked the mother. "Wait till you have seen the garden. It stretches far beyond that to the parson's field. But I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?" she continued, rising. "No, I declare the largest egg lies there still. I wonder how long this is to last. I am quite tired of it." And she seated herself again on the nest. "Well, and how are you getting on?" asked an old duck who paid her a visit. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break. But just look at all the others. Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are the image of their father, who is so unkind he never comes to see." "Let me see the egg that will not break," said the duck. "I have no doubt it is a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch some once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. I could not get them to venture in. Let me look at the egg. Yes, that is a turkey's egg. Take my advice, leave it where it is and teach the other children to swim. I think I'll sit on it a little while longer, said the duck. As I have sat so long already, a few days will be nothing. Please yourself, said the old duck, and she went away. At last, the large egg broke and a young one crept forth, crying, "Beep, beep." It was very large and ugly. The duck stared at it and exclaimed, "It's very large and not at all like the others. I wonder if it really is a turkey." We shall soon find it out. However, when we go into the water, it must go in if I have to push it myself. On the next day, the weather was delightful, and the sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves. So the mother duck took her young brood down to the water and jumped in with a splash. "Quack, quack," cried she, and one after another the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant and swam about quite prettily with their legs paddling under them as easily as possible. And the ugly duckling was also in the water swimming with them. "Oh," said the mother, "that's not a turkey. How well he uses his legs and how upright he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all, if you look at him properly." "Quack, quack." "Come along now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard. But you must keep close to me or you may be trodden upon. And above all, beware of the cat." When they reached the farmyard, there was a great disturbance. Two families were fighting for an eel's head, which after all was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that is the way of the world," said the mother duck, wetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head herself. "Come now, use your legs and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to that old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them all and has Spanish blood. Therefore she is well off. Don't you see she has a red flag tied to her leg, which is something very grand and a great honor for a duck? It shows that everyone is anxious not to lose her, as she can be recognized both by man and beast. Come now, don't turn your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother. In this way. Now bend your neck and say quack." The ducklings did as they were bid, but the other duck stared and said, "Look, here comes another brood, as if there were not enough of us already. And what a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here." And then one flew out and bit him in the neck. "Let him alone," said the mother. "He's not doing any harm." "Yes, but he's so big and ugly," said the spiteful duck, "and therefore he must be turned out." "The others are very pretty children," said the old duck, with the rag on her leg. "All but that one. I wish his mother would improve him a little." "That's impossible, Your Grace," replied the mother. "He's not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well or even better than the others. I think he will grow up pretty, and perhaps be smaller. He's remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed." And then she stroked his neck and smoothed the feathers, saying, "It's a drake, and therefore not of so much consequence. I think he'll grow up strong and able to take care of himself." "The other ducklings are graceful enough," said the old duck. "Now make yourself at home, and if you can find an eel's head, you can bring it to me." And so they made themselves comfortable. But the poor duckling, who had crept out of his shell last of all and looked so ugly, was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks, but by all the poultry. "He's too big," they all said.
And the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail and flew at the duckling and became quite red in the head with passion, so that the poor little thing did not know where to go and was quite miserable because he was so ugly and laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day till it got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him and would say, "Ah, you ugly creature, I wish the cat would get you." And his mother said she wished he had never been born. The ducks pecked him, the chickens beat him. And the girl who fed the poultry kicked him with her feet. So at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedges as he flew over the palings. "They're afraid of me because I'm ugly," he said. So he closed his eyes and flew still further until he came out on a large moor, inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very tired and sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they stared at their new comrade. "What sort of a duck are you?" they all said, coming around him. He bowed to them and was as polite as he could be, but he did not reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you do not want to marry one of our family." Poor thing, he had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some of the water on the moor. After he had been on the moor for 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather goslings, for they had not been out of the egg very long, and they were very saucy. "Listen, friend," said one of them to the duckling, "you're so ugly that we like you very well. Will you go with us and become a bird of passage? Not far from here is another moor, in which there are some pretty wild geese, all unmarried. It's a chance for you to get a wife. You may be lucky, ugly as you are." Pop, pop, sounded in the air, and the 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes, and the water was tinged with blood. Pop, pop, echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor, and some were even seated on branches of trees overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke from the guns rose like clouds over the dark trees, and as it floated away across the water, a number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, and at the same moment a large, terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing his sharp teeth, and then, splash, splash, he went into the water without touching him. "Oh," sighed the duckling, "how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me." And so he lay quite still while the shot rattled through the rushes and gun after gun was fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then the poor young thing did not dare to move. He waited quietly for several hours and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening, he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only remained standing because it could not decide on which side to fall first. The storm continued so violently that the duckling could go no farther. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door was not quite closed in consequence of one of the hinges having given way. There was therefore a narrow opening near the bottom, large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly and got a shelter for the night. A woman, a tomcat, and a hen lived in this cottage. The tomcat, whom the mistress called "my little son," was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr, and could even throw out sparks from his fur if it was stroked the wrong way. The hen had very short legs, so she was called Chickie Shortlegs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, the strange visitor was discovered, and the tomcat began to purr, and the hen to cluck. "What is that noise about?" said the old woman, looking round the room, but her sight was not very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat duck that had strayed from home. "Oh, what a prize!" she exclaimed. "I hope it is not a drake, for then I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait and see." So the duckling was allowed to remain on trial for 3 weeks, but there were no eggs. Now the tomcat was the master of the house, and the hen was mistress, and they always said, "We and the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and the better half too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen would not listen to such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked. "No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue." "Can you raise your back, or purr, or throw out sparks?" said the tomcat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited, till the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through the open door, and then he began to feel such a great longing for a swim on the water that he could not help telling the hen. "What an absurd idea," said the hen. "You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away." "But it is so delightful to swim about on the water," said the duckling, "and so refreshing to feel it close over your head while you dive down to the bottom." "Delightful indeed," said the hen. "Why, you must be crazy. Ask the cat. He's the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about on the water or to dive under it, for I will not speak of my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she is. Do you think she would like to swim, or to let the water close over her head?" "You don't understand me," said the duckling. "We don't understand you? Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat or the old woman? I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child, and thank your good fortune that you have been received here. Are you not in a warm room, and in society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatterer, and your company is not very agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your own good. I may tell you unpleasant truths, but that is a proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible." "I believe I must go out into the world again," said the duckling. "Yes, do," said the hen. So the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive, but was avoided by all other animals because of its ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them in the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood on the ferns crying, "Rah, rah!" It made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun set amid radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen anything like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. As they climbed higher and higher in the air, the ugly little duckling felt quite a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck towards them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened himself. Could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he dived under the water and rose again, almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the names of these birds, nor where they had flown, but he felt towards them as he had never felt for any other bird in the world. He was not envious of these beautiful creatures, but wished to be as lovely as they. Poor, ugly creature, how gladly he would have lived even with the ducks had they only given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder. He was obliged to swim about on the water to keep it from freezing. But every night the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice in the water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep the space from closing up. He became exhausted at last and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature. But when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought that they would do him some harm. So he started up in terror, fluttered into the milk pan and splashed the milk about the room. Then the woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still more. He flew first into the butter cask, then into the meal tub and out again. What a condition he was in! The woman screamed and struck at him with the tongs. The children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in their efforts to catch him. But luckily, he escaped. The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down quite exhausted in the newly fallen snow. It would be very sad were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling endured during the hard winter. But when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor amongst the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining, and he heard the lark singing, and saw that all around was beautiful spring. Then the young bird felt that his wings were strong as he flapped them against his sides and rose high into the air. They bore him onwards until he found himself in a large garden before he well knew how it had happened. The apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down to the stream which wound round a smooth lawn. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling remembered the lovely birds and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to those royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me because I am so ugly and dare to approach them. But it does not matter. Better be killed by them than pecked by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the maiden who feeds the poultry, or starved with hunger in the winter." Then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they espied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark grey bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. Good night.